What do you think of would be the consequences of Milei defaulting on his foreign debt? So what if he just says, I'm a new president. All of the previous ones were corrupt. I'm not responsible for what they did. If you lent our previous president, you are an accomplice of the horrible Keynesian regime that was in charge. And your just punishment is that you shouldn't get paid back. And so we don't owe anybody anything, and we are not paying anybody back.
The Argentinian government's reputation as a good debtor would be destroyed. Yeah, not the reputation.
There is no reputation. That doesn't exist.
I also say there are two kinds, or I say there are two kinds of reputation. There's a reputation to be a good, efficient government that gets tax revenue and is able to pay their bills, to pay their tax collectors, and to pay the IMF. Yeah, this is one kind of reputation. And then there's a reputation to be the first libertarian government in the world. Which one do you want to uphold? Yeah, you can only uphold one of them. Yeah, and if he would default or repudiate the public debt, then he would uphold the reputation of being the first libertarian government, and he would lose the reputation and of being an effective tax collector and payer of its bills, of government bills. And this would have the consequence that the Argentinian government would not get more loans easily. And this is some advantage that Rothbard points out. Yeah, well, this would be great, Rothbard writes.
Exactly.
Because then the government cannot indebt itself so easily anymore in the future. The consequence then would be probably a collapse of the peso in foreign exchanges and a collapse of the trust in if there any trust left in the peso. So I think the consequence would be a quick hyperinflation.
Yeah.
A disappearance of the pesos and the dollarization of the economy.
I mean, you say all of these like they are bad things, but
no, I'm saying this is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say this case. My answer to that question would be, in principle, it sounds like a great idea. So you just tell all the creditors, look, tough luck. You shouldn't have lent to that in irresponsible, and we're broke anyway, and we don't have money, and we're not paying you back. You should default on all the local public debt in pesos, default on all the foreign debt in dollars, and tell them all to take a hike, and then just go back start from scratch. Use the dollars that exist in the economy to try and trade with the rest of the world. Of course, then it's going to be extremely difficult for you to borrow. I'm not sure that's a bad thing. Now, in principle, that would be a good thing, because then the government could just say, all right, well, we can't borrow anymore, so now we need to raise funds, and we can only spend what we have. And so start clean slate. You raise money, and you can only pay the money from the money that you raise. And so now you are forced to have financial responsibility precisely because you don't have foreign borrowers. However, and so this is what I used to think before I wrote the Fiat Standard. But then when I wrote the Fiat Standard, having thought long and hard and studied how the fiat system works, what I think the case against paying off the debt and the reason why you need to be borrowing within the fiat system is that in the fiat system, the dollar is constantly devaluing. And so if you switch to this fiscally responsible position where Milei says, we're not going to borrow from global capital markets anyway, we don't need you people. We're going to stack dollars and only spend from the dollars that we have. We're going to go from being an indebted country to a country that has a positive balance on its cash account. So we collect taxes and we collect custom duties, and we add that money, and then we spend from that money, and we always have a running positive balance. Well, then if you're doing this, effectively you're constantly getting robbed by inflation because your dollar stash is constantly being devalued. So it's much more profitable and much less insane for you to be borrowing, because when you're borrowing, you are short the dollar. And so you're benefiting from the fact that the dollar is devaluing because your liabilities are devaluing. Whereas if you're not borrowing and you're just holding on to dollars, you are getting hurt by the devaluation of the dollar even more as a government. And so that is what makes it, in my opinion, not a sustainable strategy. However, there is a way to fix that. And the way to fix that is to hold a money that is not designed to rob you, a money that is not designed by a bunch of criminals to destroy you. Hold money that is not terrible. And the answer to that, of course, like the answer to all of the world's problems, is Bitcoin. And so if you can stack Bitcoins in your treasury instead of stacking dollars, you would expect the Bitcoins to appreciate over time. And then you don't need to borrow. Your money is not stealing from you. Your money is appreciating. And therefore, you can spend from that money. And you see this with a lot of Bitcoiners. As people become Bitcoiners, they switch away from being debt, from financing their life through debt and constantly being in debt, to paying off their debt, having a positive balance of Bitcoin, and then just spending from the Bitcoin. So you earn Bitcoin, your stash of Bitcoin goes up, and then it appreciates over time, and then you go up. And that's really, for me, why Bitcoin is so important on a national level. Ultimately, what you want to do, and for me, this is what's important about what El Salvador is doing, is that if you switch from holding dollars and treasuries and bonds and dollarized financial instruments to holding Bitcoin, then you don't have to play the global debt slavery game. You don't need to be constantly borrowing because your money is not devalued. So you don't need to be short money at every time. You don't need to be running a short position on the currency that you run your accounts in. In fact, you can run a positive balance.
Yeah, well, of course, the same applies to, let's say, gold, right? Or silver, or any hard money.
Not quite, because the problem with silver and gold is that they don't appreciate. So if you think of the last 10, 12 years, in terms of inflation, I mean, the price of gold has stuck around where, in roughly in the same range nominally, 1,500 to 2,000 roughly. And that's not kept up with inflation. So gold is effectively getting devalued. And I think the reason for that, I've discussed this in depth on a previous podcast on gold being demonetized. I think the reason for that is, on the one hand, it's very difficult to verify gold. So therefore, we constantly have a new supply of fake gold being produced, entering into the market, and then being detected later on, say a year or 2 or 3 or 5 later. People detect the fake gold, and then it gets out of the market. So this shifts gold from being a monetary metal, because what makes it a monetary metal is that it has a low supply growth rate or a high stock to flow rate. But if you're constantly making fake gold and adding it to the gold and then taking that gold out, then the growth rate becomes larger. The stockpile declines constantly, and the flow, the new production rises. So therefore, the stock to flow ratio drops, or the supply growth rate increases. So effectively, that undermines the monetary role. And the other thing is that you can't really be trading with gold. I mean, how is Argentina going to settle its accounts with China with gold? They're going to be shipping bars of gold across the Pacific. That's extremely expensive, extremely impractical, and the infrastructure for it doesn't exist. China can't verify gold from the Argentine central bank. And the only way to verify it is to melt down the bar and then recast it again. So it's enormously expensive to try and shift to a gold system, and you need the rest of the world to accept your gold. And that doesn't quite work. But with Bitcoin, at least it's very cheap and very quick to send, and it's very easy to verify. And that's why number goes up technology, as we call it in Bitcoin. That's why Bitcoin appreciates and gold doesn't.
It depends on the time frame, right? If you take a longer time frame for gold or a shorter time frame, then it's appreciating. And you don't have to ship the gold, right? You can just change the ownership of it.
Where do you hold it?
Yeah, it's someplace, or in New York. Or
exactly. London. That's how the whole thing started. That's how we got fiat. Everybody had their gold in London, and look how that worked out.
Or Switzerland. Yeah, you know that I work for a company that stores gold and silver in Switzerland, so it's also possible.
Yeah, but I mean, effectively, then you're not really trading gold, you're trading credit. And then we see how that works out. I mean, this is really, there's so much attack vectors that can be inserted. You could fake the gold, you could fake the certificates for gold, you could fake the number of gold bars that you tell people are there. It's very difficult for individuals to verify, but with Bitcoin, you download a node and you verify all the supply of Bitcoin. That's what the difference is.
Yeah, you can have third parties checking your gold and silver. Of course, this has costs. I mean, every monetary standard has its own costs. This is something that I talked to in this Rebuild book about the real bills. That of course, if one cost of the gold standard is that their resources will be dedicated for mining gold, all the time, and if there's a price deflation, then more resources will be dedicated. But the Fiat Standard has also cost, which is all the central bankers' salaries and brain power for the Fiat bankers and the monetary policy makers, plus the business cycles produced and everything that's the cost. And the Bitcoin has its costs also, energy costs, and then in a free market, people would then decide what system is more convenient, best, which is best for them.
Yeah, and I think for the past 14 years, I think the free market has been very loudly shouting that more and more people are getting into Bitcoin, and the choice is becoming Bitcoin. If only we could orange pill Javier Milei and get him to stack sats. I mean, whatever little reserves they have right now, convert them to Satoshis, default on the public debt, fire all public sector workers, then we're talking.
Well, you can make contracts in Bitcoin right now in Argentina, right?
Yeah, but I mean, the important thing is his own, the government's balances. If the government's cash balances is held in Bitcoin, then we're talking. That's the key.
Yeah, that would be an option.
Yeah, that's the really shocking out there libertarian position to have. So we ended up making Milei look like a moderate neoliberal.